Hey there, my name is Atticus King, and today I'll be talking a little bit about my world map. I should start actually by saying one of my world maps. This is Lothen, and it is the most important and crucial planet to my story, but it is only one of 5. As you can see here, this is the front side on the left, or back, it's all relative in space. However, the blue one on the right hand side is the opposite side of this planet. I have not exactly gotten to it. All I know for certain is there is a giant region called Hanem. And the way my story is set, it is currently the end of a 500-year night. So Lothen spins incredibly slowly, and it actually orbits its star almost at the exact rate that it's spinning. So I've turned on some of these layers to explain more of what I mean. As you can see here, the right-hand side is in night, and the left-hand side is in day. Normally on Earth, this is a process where you would see the dawn line moving as you watched, and within 24 hours it would look just like this again. However, on Lothen, it will take 1,000 years for it to get back to this exact appearance. So Hanem currently is experiencing dusk. Now, for a lot of my story, the reason I haven't really progressed this is because I tend to ignore Hanem and I just assume that it is relatively stable. But what happens at dawn when there is not a stable society? So as you can see, there's a whole bunch of detail. Today, I would like to focus in on one location. And if you want to see more, we can come back later and take a look at other places. But this location is called Denorad, and it lays before the Greatscape in a bowl called the Dorak Shale, before which stand 2 great black doors. From the Dorak Shale runs the Thed, which meets the Mauroin at a lake above a fall. Now these are the race lines. And orange and red are of similar nature, and these are the Arnen. They are almost like mankind, but they are inhabitants of Lothen long term. So day and night they stay here, whereas mankind tends to struggle. Blue and orange here is a combining of 2 great kingdoms of Castan, who are returning now that daylight is coming. It sort of is becoming a frontier, a race to resettle, as the curtain of night lifts. Now that the land is beginning to soften, everyone wants to resettle there. These are 2 great kingdoms, and they are some of the first back, and they take this very precious land, which is a valley hidden beneath the trees. It was once an inland sea, and now it is one of the most flat, open, and desirable lands for the growing of crops. Mining is not as valuable here, particularly because much of the mining has already been done by an ancient culture called Erudum, who built the great capital here. They were great carvers. It is very difficult to carve the Lothen stone. It takes a lot of skill and a long time, and those are both things that they had in wealth. Now, however, this haste to settle before the sun rises has led many to simply reside in what was already built. Folks have moved back into the stone halls of Oscabel. They have moved into places in the hills. Down here at Lanteloth, which is of the race of Denorad, but also a sort of combining of men and Arnen. It is of interesting creation. For Lanteloth was once a mine. Lanteloth had taken both time and effort, and a terrible toll to render. Its 40-story towers diminished all who looked upon them, as such a stature had not been made in all the dark world, and never was to be made again. Against the failures of all the others, Lanteloth had prevailed. For 400 years it had been a mine, a shallow mine for rootstep and copper, until the face of the great south cliff had been scoured and scarred and pierced with 1,000 holes. And still it was not easy to set the walls straight and the roads even. It was a thing which could not be reproduced, and up and down the city there was pride for it. Despite this pride, however, Lanteloth was half finished, protruding from the cliff as if it could not cross the threshold into the plains. A great city had been carved, certainly, yet something had set its carvers to other sites before the work had been entirely completed. The highest houses of the high city had unfinished rooms, doors which led into empty apses, and hallways to nowhere. The great stairs which ascended the 7 levels suddenly seemed to melt with places still to go. The White Tower, tallest and most important, fluted outward to a broad base of rough stones somewhere in the lower city. Yet the inhabitants felt something special for their residence, despite all this, or perhaps even because of it. But Lanteloth was not the strength of the Arnon in the south. That was a mantle worn by Denorad. Denorad was too grand to have been carved by hand. It was a form which only water could produce. Over the back of the Edirils flowed many streams, which fell as waterfalls down into the forming of the Thed, and there, over millennia, had hollowed a great bowl within the stone. The way into Denorad ran along a steep road. At times, this road came to a precipice overlooking a deep chasm of stone, where the Thed ran along the bottom, while other times it curved away into the folds of the mountains, dipping and climbing through the shades of bowers, running through glistening townlets nestled in the warmth of the hills. Yet the road always came back into sight of the river Thed. It crossed over it at 2 points. At the first crossing, high above the river, there was raised a broad stone passing called the Thed Mount, which had to each side a high square tower and battlements of silver stone. These were manned by the guard of Edirad and tended well by full garrisons. Above the east mount, a long blue pennant with a pointed end streamed in the winds, while over the west mount, a stiff orange banner, taller than it was long, held its staff. Upon it was the ember of Denorad, the pride that would never ail nor change with the will of light winds, and so its color was the standard of the fighting men, and meant much to the folk of the mountain hold. It was at the second crossing that we come to this dot. And this dot is a city, called Arollin, which was set low upon the ground, the bridge so low that it hardly stood above the surface of the water. And Arollin was carved specifically upon the west bank, under a great overhang of stone, so that in most of the hours of the long day, it was out of the sunlight. All the while, the Thed is running out, and through the great doors which stand here and here, by the side of our second city here, Gatewatch, or the Fairferoth. And as I have said in my other videos, all of these names are going to change. Some will stay the same, but they are very fluid. We're dealing with actively evolving language. You can imagine this is what people at this exact moment may call them. It certainly might be Arollin and Gatewatch and Denorad. But by the end of its creation, when I have set the words in stone, they might have changed. As might the very nature of the world, the races who live here, the topography of the places, the names of the rivers, the courses of the rivers. So much can change, but that does not mean it can't be beautiful in the moment. Now, I have gone into enough detail on the very path to get to Denorad, but now Denorad itself. And I must admit there is not much that I know about Denorad. As a matter of fact, they covet their secrets very dearly. You see, the folk of Denorad are the Arnon kind, the kind who stay through the long nights. But what gets you through the long night? Fire. To survive, they have harnessed fire in a way that fire has not been harnessed before. And over both Denorad and Ord Manthe, their greatest city, there burn great beacons of perpetual flame. But there are also others who live upon the world of darkness, and they too covet fire. And so the Arnon covet all their secrets dearly, for they do not know which ones would be of aid to the enemy. What I do know is that along the southeast side of the Great Bowl of Denorad is the Falls, where the Thed drops at least 2 or 3 times before it reaches a low bottom, and it shallows, and it kind of meanders. The Thed is a very lackluster river. So lackluster, in fact, that a lot of the time, travelers who do not want to have to take the long and winding road out will simply walk down the river and out through the great black doors, for that is far quicker. Now, to the southwestern side, down here, there are a series of hills, and upon them is sat the majority of the buildings. A lot of these buildings have high, white walls with red-capped roofs, plazas and atriums and fountains and gardens, for there is a wealth. Few know it's there. Few know of its grandeur, except those who have been to the very heart and have seen it within the firelight and beneath that line of beacons across the ridges of the Edirils and beneath the eye of the Ettercap. I would like now to zoom out to the surrounding area and show you some of the words and logos of this place, and also what is nearby. The organization I have for this map is not currently finalized. It is more of what you would consider working titles for everything. As I said, things are fluid, but also the way I show them. And so what I've done here is I've simply put the word Denorad, and then I've just showed some of the things that are around here. The halls of Kessa, the Dorak Shale, the drum caps. The Arnon sounds are often drums. The symbol of Denorad is strong, for Denorad is one of the hardiest of the cities. It sits so very close to the great mountains, but it is also a symbol of freedom. Wings. Here we have Erlin, but I also include some of the other names it could either go by or what I might change it to. Aranith or Elabris. I don't think I'll change it to Aranith. In fact, reading it right now, I don't like that, but I'm also not so certain about Erlin. We have the Wolderin, the Woldering, all these different names for it. That is the region on top of the Edirils, in a very flat place, which once had a lot of temples of an older race upon it. Now, I don't know much about this, but what I do know is that the path into Denorad is extremely windy, and it actually comes through this area and makes its final climb through the Wolderlands. And the Wolderlands are actually rolling hills. And then it begins to descend. Here we have the doors of Ezerod. These are the Great Black Doors. And far away, in Ordmanth, at the very edge of the sea, is another set of doors. They both open and close to the heart of this low valley. And standing beside the doors is Gatewatch or Doorwatch. Again, I don't know. So that is Denorad. And the last thing I should say before we move on is the Lords of the Fall. This is a play on multiple things. It is both the fall, as in the browning and goldening of leaves and fall time, as my characters do end up reaching there around October. However, it is also far more than that, because Denorad is dying. Socially, politically, economically, it is thriving. But the very halls upon which it is built, halls of a muddy stone, are beginning to decay. And as the light of the first sun, there are two, mind you, begin to touch upon these halls, they are starting to melt. And that bowl, which makes the great city, will soon be gone. It is so small that it doesn't even make the map, but there is another stream called the Erne here, which meets the Thed somewhere before this outcropping, where Herod Lithalin is, on the plains of Denorad. And the plains of Denorad also lie within what many consider the Greatscape. Now that is a play on landscape. It is the Great Landscape, because it is one of the most flat places across this map. And it is hard to tell, so I like to use a little thing called bank heights, which is just a little rainbow indicating in red the height of the highest banks and in green the lowest. It's very simple, but as you can see here, at the edge of Forn, where the Brasswater or the Corpid sand comes through. We have very high cliffs, and the waters seem to cut right through them. On the edge of the cliffs there lies Minadel, and Minadel is a war city. Its logo almost appears like a bow being pulled back, or like an oxbow in a river. It is called the Oxbow or the Bess. It is called the Firth of Minadel because Firth is the Arnon word for city. As you can see, it has a slightly different color. It is more burnt, bloody. Because if you think that Denorad is dangerous, imagine dwelling before the Madelrist or the Targarbrack. Imagine staying in this place that is coated by great forests. Back down on the Greatscape or the Gold Lantern, under the heat of the first sun, the grasses ignite and they burn in vast swaths, so great and so black that many of these places, particularly on the plains of Tilfereth, and a little bit in Cantradan, but a little bit less, become the burn. Now you may be wondering what all these red and blue and green lines are, what this squiggly thing is. These are all very important to what sets my story apart from Tolkien. Very obviously, Tolkien is the grandfather of all fantasy, but I don't want to create just fantasy. I want to do something that is new. If I am going to create a map, what could make it that slight bit different? And I realized that it is technology. Technology on a fantasy map. These are power networks. This is the Senaf. It is a communications relay. This is wired communication, because on Lothen, to have any sort of reception, even radio waves tend to be blocked on Lothen. The most easy thing is a wired connection, and even that is difficult to set up. So this is a map of power. And this black thing here is indicating that a dam is creating hydroelectric power. We would also assume that there's other sources of power in this area. Here, these two symbols are indicating wind power, but that is a separate system reaching down to Lanteloth. It is sort of like the branches of a tree. Blue are the small twigs on the end. Green is slightly more. Red is where the highest voltage is traveling, between cities, across the Greatscapes. I can go into a whole lot more detail, as you can probably see. I bet a lot of you are wondering about what lies beneath it and beyond. What is Decimo? What are the ruins of Oranoth? What is Pelasgoth, or the Blue Road? But these are questions for another day. I certainly hope you enjoyed. Leave a comment if you did, and I'll be sure to reply. Alright, I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.